Hey everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of Fight Chat Friday from TKD Coach Academy. We are in episode 190, and this week we're going to the European Championships in Lublin, Poland, where we're going to have a look at the female side of the event, the senior female minus 70 kilo sparring final in particular between Ursa Terdin from Slovenia and Zuzanna Gzadla from Poland. So interesting fight and familiar opponents, I think, as well in this one. So it'll be a nice one to watch.
Yeah, before we do get into the fight, we're going to have a look at last week's poll. So we did speak about advantages. Check that out in episode 189 if you haven't done so already. And there's definitely a big advantage leaning on the way of the advantages. So we have a 74% versus a 26% return. For play advantages, wait and see. So we're talking about here if you can maybe give that a second or two after every exchange to see what develops, and then maybe intervene if necessary, because it might end up being a more advantageous position for the person who was fouled upon. So yeah, more people in agreement there with a 75% more or less return.
Yeah, and we can dig into that and have a look at that later on. So jumping into the match, let's give this a quick look. We have Ursa in red and Zuzanna in blue. And right off the bat, I can tell you, as we've reviewed this one before, the first minute is very much setting distance. It's front leg carries, a little bit of trading around the center of the ring in terms of just testing for space before we get into any more meaty action.
Yeah, so straight away we can see the battle we've seen a lot through these Euros, the front leg axe and more direct lift over the top versus direct side kick to the hip. So obviously, Zuzanna, being that taller fighter, has that advantage in terms of the length of the leg. But we always say, just because someone is taller than you, it's definitely still a good idea to keep your own side kick intact. And I think Ursa will be aware of this. She's not going to give up on her own front leg and use that to disrupt Zuzanna from taking advantage and control with her own front leg and the distance game.
Yeah, and what we haven't seen just yet, but this is the first example of it, is the continuation. So looking to create a little bit of movement off of the front leg to give something to follow. Zuzanna has looked to get into hands, and Ursa has timed it quite well there with the defensive sidekick coming towards the edge of the ring. She did end up conceding the warning as well, though.
Yeah, so here we see Ursa trying to get it to the hands this time. A little bit more difficult when you have that extended range. So I think she was getting a better return so far off the leg. So I would be going back to that. And we see here she's timing that leg really, really well. So it is a factor as well when the distance is further. If you're the taller fighter, you also have to bypass that further distance to get the hands. So maybe it's a good idea to start off with your own legs, and you want to have a good carry and you want to have your feet underneath you set well. But a little bit more difficult now when you're losing 4-0 to start off in the first round. You kind of have to chase the fight that little bit more than you'd want to.
Yeah, now there is one card still very, very, very close here, but in general, at this point in the match, Ursa looks quite comfortable and is kind of relying on attacking the dropping leg from Zuzanna. Interestingly, as Ursa's gone to hands there, not a huge return, that's fine. But we start to see into round two that some of these clashes come out with some unusual scoring.
Okay, yeah, we would like to see probably Zuzanna use the front leg more to put pressure towards the edge, because Ursa is looking for her moment to be able to counter as well. And she has to give up ground to do so, like we see here. So she's pushing towards that last mat. And she's looking to get that defensive side kick, but that means you have to take steps back to get the space to do so. So maybe rack those warnings up if you're Zuzanna and try get that third warning as a start and then build from there. But we see a little bit more intent from her in this round, definitely.
Mm-hmm. I think, particularly with a front leg like that, you'd love to see her creating threats across different distances and attacking both sides of the head. So Ursa can't feel as comfortable to step forward, and it maybe forces her to wait and time the dropping leg, which again in turn gives Zuzanna the opportunity to have a double shift carry or to vary her distance. That defensive side kick, the first one from Zuzanna, pulling her right back into the match there as well.
Yeah, so strategically now I'd be looking for Ursula to go back to the leg herself, wait for Zuzanna to put some pressure on, and she's probably going to have to come with the hands at some stage if she's not able to use that leg, because she's not getting much of a return with the leg so far. Her carry isn't as aggressive and fast enough. As we see, she gets to the hands here, and then I'd be looking for Ursula to just bring her into that defensive psychic of her own again.
Yeah, I mean, myself, just putting it back to that exchange with hands, I find it quite an unusual one. So this is an example where, like we have seen before, Zuzanna starts, but from this angle, it looks like Ursa is a bit more accurate in terms of the hands landing, but it doesn't work out that way on the scoreboard. So there is still sometimes an advantage to being first and at least getting that first accurate shot on target.
Yeah, for the game state now, I'd be looking to get that third warning if I'm Zuzanna to bring it back to 2-2, and then it completely changed the whole game, essentially. It just puts it in a different mindset, and she doesn't have to chase it as much, where now she's still forcing it, still chasing it, 20 seconds left. You know, it's not where you want to be chasing the fight at this moment, but to be fair to Ursa, she's really, really controlling the ring quite well and making sure that she's not getting that third warning, which now it doesn't really matter as much because the scores are gone ahead for Ursa on all those cards again.
As I said, but we can see right to the very, very end we're flickering. We're ending up with it being pulled back to level a couple of times. There was a case just back here as well, and a very delayed score. I think it took about 5 seconds for the score to go on, which leaves us looking. You were just talking about it being 2-2 and Zuzanna pushing out. We have this side kick that lands here, 3, 4, 5. It finally arrives on the scoreboard. So you can imagine, as a coach, you've already looked at the scoreboard and looked away again. You could potentially be giving the wrong advice at this stage and be still pushing for the warning when you do need the score. So I think well done to Dorota there. She did cop it and was pushing Zuzanna to get forward and chase the score down.
The reversal there in the last sequence from Ursa was actually excellent and perfect for her, because that would have changed things for her, I think, in that moment. So it ends up being a comfortable one in the end in terms of how you look at the scoreboard. But there was a moment where nice reversal here, really good. So that kind of got her out of a little bit of trouble. It would have changed the game state for the last 10 seconds or so again. But in the end, on the scoreboard, again, it looks like a comfortable one, but it wasn't in the end.
No, absolutely. Those last two scorecards on the right-hand side stayed very, very, very close throughout the whole match until that very last defensive sidekick where a 2-point differential kind of appeared. But they stayed very, very, very close through the rest of the match. And it does show you so often how it can, you can watch it from one or through one lens or in one perspective, and you see those defensive sidekicks and you think, okay, well, this looks good. But very often with those taller fighters, a long stretched out turning kick or something can be very clear for the judges to see as well. So you might be doing the harder work as the smaller fighter on the inside to try and get into the hands or to make that, defensive sidekick stick. But you might only get credit on one or two scorecards for a beautifully well-timed defensive sidekick just because it's hidden behind your opponent as it comes forward. So for me, an interesting one. And I think as we look into the statistics on it, there's one or two quite interesting bits that do emerge, but we can see, as you'd expect, in the white and the grey there, so a fairly high number of carries. Overall work rate, though, in terms of number of shots thrown, we're going to see a big contrast between this week and next week, where we have the 70-kilo girls, and we're going to jump down to the 57 males, and there's a very stark difference in terms of the number of shots that are thrown. But we're looking at in and around the 50 shots thrown by each of the girls here over the course of the 2-minute rounds.
Yeah, the stats that we've been looking at so far suggests the closer you can get to 50 contacts in the total fight, then that's kind of putting you really, really much in the driving seat there as the fighter who's going to be more dominant rather than 50 attempts. For me, something that's really standing out from the stats from this Euros is you must have something to link up with that front leg carry. If you just have a front leg carry and you don't have something to link with it, what we've seen so far from the 63s, for example, is a front leg carry, sidekick and axe for Ziga. And then we also seen a front leg carry linked up with Dolios and blitzes for Baja. So there were some of the fights that we've seen so far where people have links off their front leg carry, which is very important. If you just have a front leg carry, it's not going to be good enough. That's what we've been seeing so far from the last 2 or 3 campaigns at Euros and Worlds level.
Yeah, and compared to, I would say, previous championships where we've seen very, very, very good return from the sidekick, we do see one of the big differentiators here. Ursa has a lot more sidekicks thrown and contacts made with sidekick, but not necessarily getting the biggest return across the entire match on it in scoring. but we saw a couple of key moments where a defensive sidekick did separate the score, so maybe an important one out of those stats.
Yeah, the
Oh,
defensive ones are working more and scoring more than the attacking ones, I think, aren't they?
yes. Yeah, I definitely think so.
Hmm.
So here we're looking at about the 50 shots each, but there's a difference in the contact rate. So we're seeing almost a 2 times difference in the contact rate from Ursa to Zuzanna. So again, just to remind people, when we talk about contact, we don't necessarily mean what we would see as a score, but that the shot is out and is making contact through the guard and onto the body or onto the guard. And from there, what we're seeing is that there were 26 contacts from Ursa out of 51 attempts, 51% contact rate, and from Zuzanna, 15 contacts out of 56 attempts for a 27% contact rate. So you can see the difference in terms of the frequency of it. So 1 contact every 9 seconds for Ursa, 1 every 16 seconds for Zuzanna. Same warnings, lowest number of restarts we've seen in a very long time. So there was no breaks for nothing happened, no breaks for people being stuck in contact. We had 4 warnings, no fouls, the start of the first and second round, and that was it. But 1.73 contacts for Slovenia for every contact that Poland made is quite a difference.
Yeah, you'd expect that to result in a much bigger safety margin and less flags in play, which are key metrics in this slide here. But we see a safety margin of only 2.25. If you have that third warning for either girl, that changes that a little bit more and brings
Yeah,
it closer into play. And then you're only talking about a 1 point game, or you're talking about a 3 point game, which are very, very stark differences. So you're talking about a headshot between each one, or just one single punch, which is a big difference. And that will change how many flags are in play then as well, of course, that way. But overall, we see 5 versus 6 technique variety, something which is quite common in the female game. And we have been looking at the contacts rate as of late as well, where we're looking at the first and last in contact. So Zuzanna is first into contact more often, but Ursa is last in contact more often. So that kind of backs up our current theory that we have, that there's a little bit of a reverse point fighting mentality going on with the scoring, where it's the last person with the big exclamation point in the exchange who's getting the return on the scorecard. So that very much backs that one with 12 versus 2.
I do think as well in this one, Ursa got quite an early lead, and Zuzanna was chasing that lead for
Yeah.
probably 2.5, 3 minutes of the match. And so she had it was on her to take the initiative and to initiate the exchanges. And she was doing that, to be fair. And so because she was the one chasing and initiating the exchanges, it very often was her starting because she had to. And very often the exchanges in this match were very short. We're only talking about 2 techniques, 3 techniques in it. And so sometimes this was a case of Zuzanna initiating with the legs, making some contact, but being caught with a defensive sidekick or something like that. So it's understandable that our stats ended up that way for this match.
Yeah, to try to control, we called it a little bit more level in the first 2. I think the ring control, probably we could have edged a little bit towards Ursha, especially for that
The
lovely
last 10 or
reversal that
15
she got.
seconds anyway, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But other than that, it was quite up for grabs on both sides. Distance battle, definitely more controlled by Ursha. She was able to control with the front leg more, and especially when she used the smaller person, it's even more difficult to control that distance, but she did a really, really good job of that. So we give her the nod on the distance battle for that one.
Yeah, and I think that was where the majority of the points were picked up, which was that, attacking the dropping leg and making sure she was picking up those defensive sidekicks. So I think we kind of get credit distance control for that particular one. So jumping back just to our advantage conversation from the last day, I'd really love to invite any referees out there, take this one to the club and play with it and let us know what happens, or let us know what you think. Maybe just set up a few matches between competitors within your club and just test out, see what happens when you allow for the creation of advantage. And maybe we'll see some of those kind of things. Maybe with a little bit of practical experience in running it, we can figure out what the strengths and weaknesses of the idea are. Certainly, I've mentioned it to a few referees, and they haven't had a chance to do anything with it yet, but are curious about the idea, would be the way I would put it.
Yeah. Well, we do have some referees, I think, It's particularly, it would be great to have this in like a trial tournament, or even like a test match day or whatever you might have.
Yeah.
But today's poll, either way, is a little bit different. We're kind of taking a broader step back and having a look. If you do want to get involved in the polls and have your say, get onto our page on YouTube and click the community tab, and then you can see all our polls linked there. And what we will be talking about this week is, are there simply too many rules in ITF? Are there too many rules for not managers, but for umpires and referees to manage? And are there too many there that they have to be aware of, which makes more stoppages, makes more infringements? Even things like we had a chat earlier in the episodes about this Euros, about things like hairbands and things like that. Are they necessary? So simple one this week: is it too many rules in our ITF competition at the moment? We need to tail it back, make it more those really important ones that we really need, instead of having a big, broad, every circumstance inside there, which is a little bit more of an infringement from time to time.
All right. Well, let's see what everyone has to say about that one, and we can pick that one up then the next time. All right, folks, that's us for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. And as I said, next week we're going to look at the 57 male from the European Championships, and that's always a bit of a belter. So we're looking forward to that one.
See you then.